Up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Fitness Oracle. It's me again, John, and today we have a very interesting guest, Robert Malatesta from Health Fitness Toronto, specializes in strength and conditioning. His strengthening and conditioning his clients as he's a strength and conditioning coach. Uh, and he's been at it for the last 21 years. He is based out of Toronto, my old hometown. So it was nice. I think that was the last interview. No, that was the second last interview I did in Toronto. It was recorded back in January. So back in my old office, and I'm in my new temporary office space here. But we talked a lot about, goal setting, building self-confidence and worth, overcoming fear, inner drive, and ego. It's a really good in-depth interview that we had, a really good discussion that we have, and I really do hope that you enjoy it. Without further ado, here's the episode. Welcome to the Fitness Oracle, where we have real conversations with real people just like you, with real stories just like yours, and this is one of their stories. I am your host, John Katsavos. My guest today is Robert Malatesta from Healthy Fitness Toronto. Robert is a strength and conditioning coach with 21 years of experience in the fitness industry. His company, Health Fitness Toronto, is an in-home personal training service that has been operating since 2008. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's Health Fitness Toronto, not Healthy Fitness Toronto.
My apologies. Health Fitness Toronto. My apologies.
No worries.
I got your name right though, right?
You did. You pronounced it almost like an Italian.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
But we're similar, right? We got a similar way of pronouncing things. So.
Yeah, we do. So how has the recent mandates here in Toronto been affecting you? How have you been doing?
Oh man, from a fitness perspective, I'd say it's been not ideal, to put it mildly. I mean, obviously there's a setback in terms of finding clients or even getting clients agreeable to having them come into their space, having me coming into their space, with all the restrictions and whatnot. So it's kind of tough because of what I do. The nature of my business is very, hands-on, where I'm there and I'm, manipulating the client, so to speak, to do stretches and certain movements or just spot exercises. So it's a little bit challenging to do that when there's obviously space restrictions, right? You have to maintain a certain distance.
Yeah, I know it's presented different challenges for different people and different opportunities in the same way, in the same breath. What got you into personal training?
Well, I mean, it was something I always enjoyed. Like going back to high school, I was one of those guys that would go to the gym. We had a little gym in our high school, and it wasn't terribly busy, surprisingly enough. And anyways, so at that time, I was like, well, what do I want to do with myself? And I had a couple of ideas, but we had a course in our final high school year for kinesiology, which is what I ended up pursuing. And then I liked it a lot. And I thought, this is something I enjoy. I love science, but I wanted to do something practical. Like I would have loved to work for like National Geographic or something like that, but the prospects were not very good. Like, what are the odds I'm going to get hired by a company like that? So I just thought to myself, realistically, people need to get in better shape. They feel good about themselves. If they do, I have an opportunity to help that happen. So this is a go-to for me. And then I studied it in university. I got a degree in it. And the rest is history.
You practice martial arts, am I correct on that? I think I remember from our call before you practice.
Very briefly. I have a little bit of a background, but I wouldn't say it's like ultra extent. Yours is probably more than mine, but a little bit.
How has that affected your training style?
I mean, there's elements of, I mean, it all ties in, but in terms of, like, for example, the mindset part, like maintaining a certain mentality when you train. And that's probably something that doesn't get emphasized enough by fitness professionals, is channeling your energy, so to speak, in the appropriate way, right? Because if your mind energy is off, if your focus is off, if you're not relaxed, for example, when you're working out, you're a lot more liable to injure yourself, for one, right? And also that commitment, that dedication that you want to have that gets you to go back, right? Even on a day where you're kind of tired and you're back from work and you're like, well, I don't really feel like working out. But you have to overcome that, right? Because your brain is going to present you with a bunch of excuses every day as to why you shouldn't do what you really should be doing. And sometimes it's not pleasant, but I think I'm kind of at a stage in my life where it's like I've adopted the survival mode. And by that I mean, it's, a lot of things that we need to do in life in order to be successful are not necessarily pleasant. But if you have that survival mode mindset where you're like a lion that's has to hunt, right? A lion, let's say he's hungry. It's been 3 days since he's had his last meal. You might be worried about getting kicked in the head by a zebra. And he's like, well, I don't really feel like fighting a zebra today. But he doesn't have a choice, right? He either goes out, he does it, or he starves, right? I think in life, unfortunately, there's survival elements to it that are like that. And sometimes you have to push yourself past a certain comfort zone in order to get certain things accomplished that otherwise would not happen. And I have that mindset. I think martial arts has taught me that to a certain extent. I try to impart that to my clients. Not everyone has that mentality, but you want to push people a little bit, prod them, I should say, gently in that direction. And over time, you hope that they adopt it for themselves.
It almost sounds like you're 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 keeping people on their on what their actual goal really is, right? How and a big part of what you and I do as personal trainers is help people identify, what is your goal? And everybody has their own specific way of setting goals for their clients. What's your specific way?
Every client's different. So it's hard to just, there's no one mold that fits everybody, right? So for example, I've worked with amateur bodybuilders. I've worked with amateur athletes. A lot of them tend to be very self-motivated once they're at that level. So they don't need as much push. It's more just kind of having that person there, like a coach, like a baseball coach. And I have a good background in baseball. You might say, well, why would a really, really good hitter need a coach, right? Like we're talking top level hitters. And the reason is that even the best players, they're going to make little mistakes here and there. And sometimes just having that presence, that kind of like a father figure, somebody who's been in the game. Usually it's an older guy who's been there, who's done it. And you have that person overlooking whatever it is that you're doing, your hitting drills and whatnot, reinforces it in your mind on a psychological level that goes above and beyond simply the physical repetitions. In training, it's something along those lines with some clients. But then with beginners, it's different. You actually have to hold their hand. And there's many levels between that, right? Intermediates and whatnot. So I would say that there's no set mold, but you're basically going in there and you have a game plan. And once you get to know your client a little bit better, the game plan becomes better established. And then you try to work within that framework. And sometimes you make adaptations depending on the goals changing or the needs changing.
It's interesting because even with the beginners, especially with the beginners and the intermediate people, um, you see this in the gym setting all the time, especially this time of year. You see all the New Year's resolutioners fall right off the cliff. How do you help your clients that are having a problem sticking to their goal, sticking to their why? How do you help them stick to it?
I think a lot of the time it's helping them to see the potential long-term benefits of what they're doing, right? Because a lot of things somebody won't do it unless they recognize how good it is. Like taking vitamins every day. I'm a vitamin fanatic. And sometimes just taking those vitamins is a pain in the butt, right? Because you're like, oh, I got to swallow like, 15 to 20 pills every day or whatever it is, or even mixing up my protein shakes. I mean, it's time consuming. But when you have the mentality, you're like, I know I can see kind of with my mind's eye what I'm trying to accomplish physically or even how I feel and whatnot, right? And so you do it anyways. You do it because you can see the benefit in advance. And I think with a client, you want to impart that to them. You know, if it's a young guy, you're like, hey, you know what? You're gonna have a better beach body, for example. You're gonna get more attention. You're gonna get less rejection. You know, when you talk to a girl, you know, like there's different aspects to it, and you have to know your client, right? That might not work with a married guy in his 50s, right? But depending on the individual, or even with the ladies, right? I work with both genders. You have to know what it is that they're looking for, what their mandate is, and then work within that. Reinforce in their mind that they're going in that direction. But if they back down, if they slack off, then they're not going to achieve what they want.
Are you a fan? Are you a fan of prepping? Like
Uh,
meal
it
prepping, getting all
I
that
mean,
stuff?
yeah, I would say again, it depends on the individual. I personally don't prep that much. I'm very spontaneous. So, you know, I don't know what I'm going to feel like eating on a certain day. And, you know, I kind of like go with the flow kind of thing. But there are some people that require that degree of structure. And again, it's knowing your client. So I kind of get a vibe for the client. You know, usually you don't within a first couple of weeks and whatnot, if it's a client that sticks around. And then you recognize what works for them, right? Do they need that degree of structure? Because not everyone is that organized. Some people are like accountants, like everything has to have like its place, right? Like at this time of day, whatever, they wake up the same time every day. I don't necessarily do that myself. I'll stay up late on a Saturday night. Like this morning, I woke up, it was past 10:30. Now, I don't normally do that. I didn't have to do anything today. And usually I wake up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. So I mean, if I could not do that on a certain day, right? But everyone's different. And some people require that structure every single day. They're up at a certain time. And every night they go to bed at a certain time.
I'm the same way. It's most days I'm up at 5 a.m. and it's like on the weekends, yeah, I allow myself to sleep in. It's my reward. Um, you said something kind of important that I wanted to expand a little bit more on, um, about, I call them cookie cutter workout programs.
Ah,
You know, lose weight in 30 days kind of program that works for everybody.
they're terrible. They're terrible. Like I'll tell you this: whenever somebody tries to cut corners to save money, you get what you pay for. And usually, people that go for that approach, like they'll do an online plan or something like that, and it's designed like generically and whatnot. What kind of results are you going to get? Everybody's different. Everyone has a different body, a different metabolism. There's so many elements and so many variables. It makes absolutely no sense to follow a generic plan, right? That one of the things I pride myself as a client, or sorry, as a trainer, I assess each client. They all do an individual assessment. And in that assessment, we look at everything. We look at their history, if they've had significant injuries that could impact what they do, their diet, if they have certain restrictions in their diet, allergies, everything, right? Like to foods and stuff. Because at the end of the day, little things that hold you back, right? Like if you have a setback in a smallest thing, it could be monumental into your training. At the very least, you're spinning your wheels. And in worst case scenarios, you get hurt and then you're set back for months. So I have to look at all those things. I mean, obviously, you don't train a young male bodybuilder the same way as you would train a senior guy who has joint issues and maybe heart problems and arthritic conditions that are starting to set in. So you have to look at all of that and you have to tailor each workout and each training regime very specifically to the type of client you're working with.
Yeah, to a degree, I agree with you. Only reason why is because I have a couple of cookie cutter programs in my toolkit. It's like, oh, you fit this here, do that. But it's I'm trying to fix that because I agree with you. I agree that, every client is different, every human is different, and we need to be able to, as trainers, really tailor the workout program specifically to the individual. And a couple of my programs are pulled off the shelf, so I could see how I could fix that. But you have a very interesting thing that you actually answered with one of the questions that I asked you before we got on the show, and building self-confidence and self-worth. What's the difference?
I mean, self-confidence and self-worth are two different things, like you said, right? So self-worth is kind of seeing your value in whatever place you hold in society. Self-confidence is feeling that you have the ability to go up against an obstacle and you can overcome that obstacle successfully. You're confident in your own ability. You might have self-worth, you feel you're important, but you lack confidence, right? Like you feel like, oh, I'm an important part of society, but I'm shy, for example. If a guy has that issue, I struggle to communicate, to get over my reservations and whatnot, or my inhibitions. So that's something that needs to be developed with time. And again, I think I said this actually in a recent, like there was this discussion, an online discussion that I kind of interjected in. And I see a lot of people these days struggle with both self-worth and self-confidence. I think a lot of it stems with the fact that people are very in tune, or they put undue emphasis on what other people think. And I don't think that that's necessarily completely wrong. Like we shouldn't be totally callous to other people's ideas and opinions. But I think that you most people are not as concerned about what you're doing in your day-to-day life as a lot of people think. It's not like they're taking any one individual and just totally like analyzing them, and they're like, oh my goodness, like they didn't match their tie to their shoelaces or whatever, right? Generally speaking, most people are just out there trying to get by, especially these days, right? They're just trying to survive. So what you say and how you say it, it's important, but you shouldn't lose sleep over it, right? Like you should be concerned about your own uh, goals and what you're trying to achieve in life. And as long as you're improving every single day, if there's critics out there, there will always be critics. And by the way, I'll add a PS to that. If you're trying to impress everybody and keep everybody happy, you're doing it wrong, because everybody has different opinions, different values. You have to stick to your own value system, your own belief system, and not deviate from that. The people that are against you are going to be against you anyways. Like if you can't deny who you really are. If you try to do it, you're going to be miserable. If you speak truthfully about who you are, you're going to offend some people who don't agree with your way of thinking. And that's fine, right? That's fine. But by being yourself, by projecting your true values to the world, at least you're going to attract who you really want into your inner circle. And who cares about those other, right? Like it's not like you're trying to be, right, a bad person, but your job is not to please the world, right? It's impossible. No politician has ever achieved that. Nobody's ever done that, because everyone's on a completely different wavelength, right? Like your job is just to go out there, project your own truth, and then draw those people that are attracted to your way of thinking into your circle.
Absolutely. Trying to find your tribe. Um,
Exactly.
and trying, once you find your tribe, you start to build that confidence and that self-worth. Going to deviate a little bit because I want to dig deeper into this tribe mentality. A lot of guys out there, specifically guys, we have this concept of the lone wolf syndrome, where I am the answer to everything. I have to have the answer to everything. How do you break that kind of cycle for a man who is in that situation, has always been reliant to be in that situation, and show him the value of being part of a pack of wolves rather than the lone wolf?
There's good and bad to that mentality. I'm not going to totally deprecate it, because part of being a man, and I'm a guy who really believes in that there is such a thing as manhood and manliness and all that, 100%. Okay. Part of being a man, you see it in nature. The dominant male, let's say, that's leading the pack of wolves, as you put it, or a pride of lions. There's a certain mentality that, yeah, I got to go out there. I got to take care of business. I got to protect my territory. I got to defend the females and the young, and provide food and whatever. And obviously that translates to humans as well. But you have to keep in mind, we're social creatures. Like we've, whether you believe in evolution or creation or whatever it is, whatever got us to where we are today, okay, our mind is designed in such a way that we are interdependent. Even males are interdependent. And that doesn't mean that we don't need leaders, but we need a certain level of cohesion and structure. We're not like tigers and bears where they're like solitary all the time and they just come together to mate one time a year, right? There are creatures like that, but the human is not like that. And if you look at primates, they're not like that, right? You look at gorillas and chimps and baboons, they're not like that, or orangutans, right? So, in order to break that framework, I think part of it has to be being so honest with yourself that you're able to acknowledge your own vulnerability, right? That's a big first step because we all have them. It's not like we're all Superman, right? You acknowledge your vulnerabilities, you acknowledge your mortality, you acknowledge your limitations. You say, look, I'm human. I could get injured. If I'm alone, right? If I'm the lone wolf and I break a leg, I'm doomed. I can't hunt. But if I'm part of a pack and I get hurt, my buddies can hunt while I recover, right? Does that make sense? And with humans, it's sort of like that, right? We've simplified things in some sense and complicated it in others. Like simplified our retrieving food strategy. We just go to the grocery store and get what we want. So that we've simplified. But other things we've made way more complicated. But men have to learn to be, like you said, find tribes, like tribe members that fit in with your way of thinking, and and be cohesive with these individuals because they'll help you to grow. They will help you to stand up in difficult times. And it's important to have people in your life that you can trust that will be there for you in those difficult times, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You actually brought up a couple of really good talking points there. Do you find that being part of a gym is a great way for men to be part of the, let's say, the gym tribe, and trying to, because I'm trying to break that concept, that idea that, with gym heads and stuff like that, because we have this concept that, all these muscular guys in the gym, they're not helpful and this and that, but that's not actually really not true. It's more like for me, it looks more of a tribe of guys that are in a, like you said, like part of a common ecosystem, if you will. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a community mindset. uh they're not everyone's going to be in that tribe mindset the same as yours, right? Because what you have in a gym is like any vocation. For example, if you any job, you're going to have a bunch of random people with that common interest, and that one common interest is working out. But as far as characters go, you're going to have a huge array of different characters in any given sport. Like I've had teammates playing baseball for many years, and they were all totally different one from the other. But within that community, you have ample opportunity. You have one thing in common that you already know is working out. And so now you have an opportunity to meet somebody, they can be your buddy or whatever, that's in that same frame of mind, that has similar values or whatever, and also has that common interest. Maybe it turns out to be your workout partner, right? Like I actually met one of my best friends in university at the gym, Tate McKenzie Gym at York University. And that was like 25. I'm giving away my age here, but it was a long time ago, right? And we're still very close friends, but that's where we met, at the gym. And it wasn't. I've met other people over the years, but he's I would say the closest friend that I met at a gym. But it happens, right? Why not? Right? You're there, you're working out. Why not?
You find that like exercise actually helps shine a light on stuff like breaking through like mortality concepts, and especially with self-implied limitations.
So this working out break down the ideas of mortality, you're saying?
More like shining a light to your mortality, and trying to be able to ki- kind of take a hold of it and kind of extend it.
I mean, it's interesting you should say that because I don't think a man should deny his mortality, right? Like, I think this is an interesting theory I have about life. Unless you overcome the fear of death, you're not going to be able to make a lot of progress. And that's interesting, right? You don't hear that very often. But I've given that a lot of thought. A lot of the things that hold us back is fear of death, if you really think about it, or fear of something really bad happening to you, like, getting hurt or something, like even traveling. Some people are terrified of flying because they're like, what if the plane crashes? But think of all the opportunities that you're denying yourself by not traveling, just because you're thinking, what could go wrong? And I think that when you train, what you're building is resilience. You're not trying to deny your mortality or avoid your or extend your, you are trying to extend your longevity, obviously, by being healthier, no question. But part of training is building resilience. And when you're able to build a tougher body and a more resilient body, you're increasing the odds that the likelihood that you're going to overcome some obstacle that comes along. just like fortifying your immune system is a great approach to avoiding disease versus simply locking yourself in your house and not going out, right? Like there's two different approaches you could take there, but the second one makes no sense. It's silly, right? So resilience is what you want to achieve. And also, of course, secondary to that would be like aesthetic benefits or whatever, right? Like if a guy wants to look good, obviously. But I think the primary reason outside of performance enhancement, like guys who actually are athletes and whatnot, obviously are doing it for their performance. But if we take that aside, the average guy who's not a professional athlete or bodybuilder, uh, there's that aesthetic element, no question. But I think the thing that brings them back to the gym the most is how they feel, right? That they've overcome adversity, right? Like you set a goal, you're like, I'm going to get 10 sets of squats, or let's say 6 sets of 10 reps of squats, really, really heavy. And just being able to do it and pushing through that barrier, clenching your teeth and getting through it. There's that sense of accomplishment. There's those endorphins that get released. Like there's just this feeling of euphoria that you're like, yeah, I did that. And actually that builds your self-confidence over time. If you could do that, you can achieve anything.
Yeah. That's a big one actually. Because building, I remember when I was experimenting with unregistered drugs. I'm just going to say that
Okay.
online. I think you and I both know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I was experimenting for about 15 days and I didn't see the growth. And I went from bench pressing 135 pounds to just over 300 pounds in 15 days. It
Oh,
was a crazy increase.
was it the Anabol, if you don't mind me asking?
No, it was hemobolin.
Okay.
It was
Okay.
hemobolin. I am not endorsing any form of steroid. I just want
Okay.
to be clear. When I find if I find out my clients are on steroids, I fire them right away. I don't
Okay.
want anything to do with them. Just so people understand like where I'm coming from. I was
I mean,
curious about it and I
yeah,
tried it.
I don't judge anybody. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like there's as far as performance enhancing drugs go, I don't think there's anything wrong in and of itself if somebody wants to go down that path, unless there's an actual, they're actually part of a sport or whatever that prohibits it. And now they're violating the rules of their game. But if there's just some guy or whatever that has hit a plateau and he can't break it for whatever reason, it's a personal decision. I don't recommend it. I don't think it's healthy long term. I don't think the short term issues are that significant, but there are long term issues, mostly cardiovascular, right? Because your heart is a muscle, so it can start growing out of control. And I know people who had that happen where their septum became enlarged, the middle part of the heart, over time, right? It doesn't happen from 1 or 2 cycles, but over time. Uh, that being said, I don't judge anybody if they've done their research, they're absolutely determined to go down that path. But I do say that they should do their research and be responsible because of all the things that can go wrong, especially if they're injected. Right? Not that I want to go into that too
Yeah.
much, but you could get a nasty infection, for example, if you don't know what you're doing with that, right?
Yeah. Well, where I was trying to go with it is people don't see the change. And it's not the visual, for me, it's not the visual change that's important for a person. Because if you're going to change, if you're going to the gym 3 to 6 times a week, minimum 60 minutes, your body's going to change. But the thing that I was trying to get to was, do you think it's more important for the person to fix how they feel about themselves so that they can appreciate the change when they see it, or when someone points it out to them?
100% they should fix it themselves. Like happiness comes from within, right? You've heard that before. There's no person, there's no external factor that can just give it to you. You have to learn to think a certain way. I mean, part of maturation is for anybody, any person, male or female, is learning to think in such a way that you're self-sufficient in a sense. You don't have to rely on anybody else because by requiring validation, and I don't want to completely dismiss the need for validation, but if you're so dependent on validation, like these people that live on Instagram or Facebook and they need 5,000 likes and they're constantly posting, and that's their euphoria, right? That's how they get their sense of self-worth is from all that validation, but that's silliness. These people don't even know them, right? And a lot of the time these photos are all brushed up and whatnot. Validation should be an internal thing. You know who you are, what you stand for, what you value, what, if you're a person of integrity and you know that for yourself, and that's part of your validation. Also having your values in the right place, right? If your values are very fickle and very superficial, like somebody, a woman, let's say, validates herself on the basis of her breast size, well, that's a terrible thing on which to base your validation, right? Or anything that can go with time, like even her beauty. I'm not saying, we're men, we love that, we're drawn to women's beauty, but one shouldn't base their self-worth on how they look, because then when they age, now how are they going to think that they're worthless because they've aged? Like, so self-worth should be based on who you are, what you stand for, what's on the inside, which unfortunately doesn't get talked about enough. We live in a society that doesn't even make sense to me. Like the things that are given importance and the things that are not given importance in today's society are so messed up, right? It's outrageous. But what can you do, right? You just try to impart wisdom, help people to see the truth for what it is. And hopefully with time, I mean, people start to recognize that, yeah, the media is just out. They're just like reporters, right? Right? They're just kind of like trying to glorify things and blow things up out of proportion, but they don't really have a good grasp of what really matters. And that is unfortunately, we have to figure that out for ourselves a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And a big thing that we're not going to get, I don't want to get political at all on this show. Just this is about like improving men's mental health through exercise. But it's hard not to, because we have been inundated and pushed with so much fear over the past 2 years that it's become tiresome.
Yes.
On both sides, it's become tiresome. And I'm a big fan of moving into your fear and trying to understand it and trying to see what it does to you. So you more become friends with your fear, friends with what scares you. How do you help people overcome their fear?
That's an interesting question, because we're all we're all works in progress. And I wouldn't say that your goal in life should be to completely overcome fear, because a healthy level of fear is good for you. Right? Fear exists to protect you, right? So, if you see the edge of a cliff, even a lion is not going to walk off, because he knows if he does, he dies, right? He has enough, understanding to avoid that situation. Or, 3 lions attack 1 lion. He takes off. He says, "Oh, I'm outnumbered." The fear serves his interests. The problem becomes when fear becomes inordinate. It becomes excessive or irrational, like somebody who's afraid of public speaking. That's a form of irrational fear, because what bad thing could come out of that? They're probably thinking they're going to embarrass themselves or something, right? And like you said, you don't want to get too far off topic here, but it all ties in when you think about anything that you're trying to achieve. And when you're talking about the mindset of men, because it doesn't get enough attention. Like, you see a lot of focus being put on different things out there these days, but men's mental health does not seem to be one of them, right? It's not one of those major focal points that's getting all the media coverage. And unfortunately, like you said, a lot of men feel like they gotta get out of it alone. They gotta figure it out for themselves. That's why the support groups have to be there. And I think fear often it's tied into not feeling supported, or feeling like, hey, you know what, if I mess up, there's no plan B, right? Oftentimes that's part of what's fostering the fear. So having a strong support system, right? Like let's say a guy challenged you to a duel and you had a big tribe, right? You had 20 guys watching your back, right? There'd be a lot less fear than if you were the only guy, right? You're the only guy and there's 20 guys challenging you now. Now you're like, oh no, right? Like, what am I gonna do, right? So you see what I mean? Like camaraderie, there's strength in numbers, right? There's strength in numbers. So even on a psychological level, if you have a network of individuals that value your opinion, that value you as an individual, they're your buddies, and they're going to back you up when you're in a corner, that alleviates a lot of the fear, right? Does it not? So I think that's a starting point, building that network. And again, it's not something that gets talked about a lot, but I think guys have to be more open with their feelings, because if they're not, right, like you don't really know a person until you're willing to be transparent and vulnerable with them, right? You're not really going to bond and gel with that individual until you break down those barriers. And so it's important that men need to learn to do that with the other men in their lives that they trust, to let down those barriers, to be willing to be transparent and vulnerable. That's how you build the bonds. That's how you build the brotherhood. And then once you have that brotherhood, now everything else falls into place.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of fall in the line where it's like, if I see that cliff, walk up to it just to see what's on the other side of that cliff. And I'll make a decision then and there whether or not I'm going to jump or not, depending on how high it is and all that. But I learned that through Systema, through the martial arts that I took.
Okay.
And
Right.
it's
Yeah.
we bring you to your fear and we help you get past it. Do you think that martial arts actually helps men? This is about men, but even women, people in general. Do you think martial arts helps people come to terms with that kind of mentality, that just it's okay to come into your fear?
Absolutely. I mean, you've probably done practices with real weapons, right? I know Systema does that. Now that obviously helps, right? Because
Some real
okay,
weapons, not a lot. Like
okay, but if you think about Freud, I took psychology in school a lot, and one of his ideas of overcoming fear, if you were afraid of snakes, he would put you in a room full of snakes. That was one of his ways of dealing. They wouldn't be poisonous snakes, and maybe you wouldn't start with that. Like you would start with just one snake, right? Like somebody who's absolutely terrified of snakes, you bring a garter snake into the room, and you're holding it 10 feet away until they start breathing normally again, right? They're no longer asphyxiated, right? And then in time you build on that. But I agree 100%. The idea is you're never going to totally extinguish that. If you're in a room with a cobra that wants to take you down, like it would be insane to completely eliminate that fear, right? But you want irrational fear to be under control. And I agree with you 100%. You want to constantly put yourself in situations, not that are dangerous necessarily, but that are uncomfortable. You want to overcome that discomfort that you feel when you're in an unfamiliar situation, for example, or anything that's anxiety provoking, especially if you know in your mind that it shouldn't be, or it shouldn't be to the degree that it is. And a lot of things that hold us back are anxiety provoking things, right? So for example, a lot of guys approaching a woman, right? They're just terrified of rejection. They're afraid of what the girl's going to say, so they just don't do it. Well, nothing happens if you don't do anything, right? You guaranteed your failure, so to speak, that you didn't get the girl. Whereas if you approach her, there's that possibility that you get the girl. So rationally, you should approach every girl you like, right? That would be the rational conclusion. So what's holding us back, right, from anything we want to achieve in life is irrational anxieties, fears, especially when you have nothing to lose, right? Worst case scenario, girl says, hey, I'm not available. Okay. All right. You move on to the next prospect. But unless you try, nothing happens, right? And too many guys are out there. I know there's guys out there that are just sleeping in bed all day, doing nothing, and just wasting their life, right? And I'm not trying to point fingers at individuals. I know individuals that do that, but that's no way to live. You have to. That's why I said earlier, you have to sort of have a mindset, a game plan, and say, this is what I want to achieve. And writing it down really helps. Put it in a list and actually write it down. I will do this, this, and that by, let's say, the end of the month of January, and make sure it gets done by the end of that month, because then otherwise you're just like wasting time, right? Make sure that you get those goals in. Make sure the goals are realistic, but they should be a little bit complicated, difficult, right? A little bit uncomfortable. If you're just doing easy things like I'm just going to buy toilet paper 10 times this month, like that's not a challenge, right? You got to go out there. You put something down that's like super challenging, right? And you go out and make it happen, right? And that helps to build that self-confidence we talked about earlier, right? When you're actually achieving the goals, then the self-confidence starts coming, right? Because you're like, yeah, I know. I put myself in this situation. I had success. If a situation is overwhelming, then tone it down a few notches, right? Because otherwise you're just gonna, right? You're gonna become very despondent if you're always failing. So make sure the goals are within reach, but that they're difficult to achieve, but achievable. And just keep raising the bar. Once you've achieved those goals, just keep raising the bar.
It's interesting. I have the mindset that I just approach 100 people. My goal for this year is to approach 100 people. Whether whatever comes out from it comes out from it.
Okay. So that's
Because
a goal, right? That's a goal for you, right?
from the world's largest introvert, that is the hardest thing for me to do.
Okay. And I can appreciate that. I'm not an introvert personally, but there are always things like that cause I mean, we all have anxiety for certain things, some of us more than others, but generally speaking, the more value you put on something, the more anxiety provoking it is. So that value is going to be in one of two directions, either what you stand to gain or what you stand to lose. And that's why people are so scared of things that can get them hurt or killed, right? Because of what they stand to lose. They value their own existence. Or if it's, let's say, a girl they really, really like, what they stand to gain, they're going to be super nervous on the date because they're like, oh, if I say the wrong thing or whatever, I'm not going to get whatever it is that I'm trying to get. So, but that's what it ties into, what you stand to lose, what you stand to gain. If it's something that's irrelevant to you, then all of a sudden you're all relaxed because you're like, well, I don't care what happens, right? Who cares, right? So I guess not taking life so seriously is part of the equation, right? Because people take things so seriously, they're like, everything's like blown out of proportion. They catastrophize, and they shouldn't do that. Opportunities are plentiful out there, right? So something might not work out. You approach something, it might not work out, and you have to have that mindset. Okay, well, there's other opportunities behind that. It's not the end of the world. So don't take anything that seriously that it should cause that degree of anxiety. I know that's easier said than done, but that should be your mindset.
That is that's very easier said than done. And this all actually ties in with people's egos. Um, and it's for me personally, when I look at like social media to do my marketing stuff, I see it blown into my face. This person's more healthier, this person's more fitter, this couple seems happier, this person seems happy. And what it really does is it helps push down the ego and make me feel like I'm worthless. I'm not saying that it does to me, but I'm just saying like some guys listening to this show or watching the show, that's what it makes them feel like. What's your I guess what's your view on the ego when it comes to social media, and how do you think that the social media world has really molded people's egos?
Well, it's interesting you bring up ego because I have a saying that I adhere to: loss of pride, loss of self. And I think that part of maturation is losing your pride and losing yourself. Now, when I say losing yourself, I don't mean yourself as a person, I mean yourself as in selfishness, right? A lot of people have this idea that they're the center of the universe and everything revolves around them. And if everything doesn't go their way, and it's not like that. I mean, we have to have a sense of community. Like we're only as valuable as our contribution to our respective societies, if you really think about it. So if we're useless to society, like a hardened criminal who's just making trouble all the time, his value is actually negative, right? If he didn't exist, he would be more valuable, right? Okay. So he's actually got a negative value to society. And of course, there's really good people that are contributing enormously to society. So again, I think it's a misplaced sense of values where you're looking at something on social media that doesn't really mean that much. Like, let's say you're seeing a guy flexing and he has 20-inch pythons or whatever, right? And you're envious of that individual because yours are only 15, let's say, okay? But again, why are you basing your self-worth on the size of your biceps, right? Like you have to, I think a lot of men have to take a kind of a self-assessment and say, what are my values? Because if your values are out of place, and here we are in a fitness program, I'm not advocating that we should all be scrawny, right? Like, but what I'm saying is, don't make that your thing that basically you're measured by it, right? That your value to society is because of that, right? A person should not be held accountable, uh, let's say for how their nose looks or something. You know what I mean? Like if it's a little bit angled or something. And people, because we live in this very, very fickle society, people are assessing one another on these constructs that they've designed that are of very, very little meaning, right? Uh, but they don't. The individual has nothing to do with that. Like you are who you are today. Now, let's say something happened to you tomorrow. Let's say you're in a car accident, your head went through the windshield, and you were disfigured, but you're the same guy character-wise, right? Society would probably, almost certainly, treat you differently. But the question is, should they be? Should they be treating you differently? Because a factor outside of your control unfortunately transpired, but you're still the same guy. If you were a good, caring, I don't know if you're married, have kids or whatever, but let's say you're a good, caring father or husband or whatever, and you're still that guy after that incident. Why should society treat you any differently? If anything, they should applaud you and say, "Wow, despite your handicap, now you're continuing to be a good father or a good husband." And that's what I mean when I say society is really messed up. I mean, what the hell is this? Like, sorry for, like, why is society so twisted with all their insane ideas? And why are people falling for it? People are falling for it because most of what's represented on social media, I'm not going to say it's meaningless, but it's icing on the cake, right? Beauty, for example, physical beauty, whether it's a woman in a bikini or, a guy who's got big biceps and a well-developed chest, whatever, is icing on the cake, right? Because the most important thing that a person should be developing is their character. And then all that other stuff is icing on the cake. So why be so focused on the icing, but completely ignore the cake underneath, which is what a lot of people do, right? It's profound. It's profound. But that's what I mean when I say maturation should inevitably take care of these things, right? Like once a person reaches a certain level of wisdom, a lot of these problems go away because now suddenly you're not envious of what's on social media. Does that make sense? Like it's not that important. It's just nice to have. If I'm 80 years old, I'd be a fool to be looking at pictures of 25-year-old guys on social media and saying, "Oh man, I don't look like this guy." Well, how could I? I'm 80. Schwarzenegger and Stallone, they've kept in good shape. They were in those Expendables movies, right? But they don't look like they did when they were 25, right? Nor
Well,
should they expect to.
well, I think they've had a little bit of chemical help with that.
And they probably still use it. Like Hulk Hogan probably still, right? But
Most
I'm
likely.
saying, right? And Jose Canseco, you can tell, right? They're still using it. But they still don't look like or could do what they did when they were 25. Otherwise, that guy would still be in Major League Baseball, right? Or Barry Bonds or whatever. But they can't do what they used to. And that's an unfortunate reality of life. You just got to come to terms with as you age.
Yeah. Do you think it's important for a person to be able to completely remove their ego or still have the ego still there?
I think the ego should go because it's not the same as self-worth or self-confidence. Like, humility is a beautiful thing, right? And ego kind of goes against that. So humility is being able to look at yourself in the grand context of things and saying, okay, I am part of something much bigger versus thinking that you're that thing that's bigger than everything else, because that's just silly, right? You have everyone thinking like that. Everyone's like slapping each other around and nobody cares about the other person. But when you look at it properly and say, I'm part of something much bigger, but I'm still part of that. I'm still important. Just like your car, if one tire gets pulled off, the whole car is useless, right? You can't drive on three tires. But that tire is also not the whole car, right? It can't operate on its own. It needs the rest of the car to operate. And society and us as individuals are exactly the same way. We're part of a larger network. That's why if you really think about gender, for example, a lot of people are engaged in this crazy gender war, but we depend on the other gender to exist, right? The women need us and we need the women. The human race would go extinct without the interdependence of the genders. And that ego is what drives people apart when what we really should be doing is coming together and working cohesively to get things done, right? Ego is a terrible thing. Now, you know, does that mean that you shouldn't have that mindset that, hey, I can achieve whatever I set my mind to? That's a different thing. That's a different thing. You want to have that confidence, but you don't want it in an arrogant kind of mindset where you're like, oh, look at me, look what I could do, and start looking down on others. Because you know, a good mentality is to want others to succeed as well. You know, if you learn something, impart it to the world, get it out there. You know, help other people to overcome a hurdle, even if it took you a lot of work and effort. Don't think, oh, I had to work so hard for this. Why should this guy get it for free? A lot of people think that way. That's terrible, right? If I discover a cure for cancer, I'm going to tell the whole world, even if I spend billions on research, because now I have the power to make the world a better place, right? Why would my I let my ego say, oh, pay me $20 billion if you want the secret, right? Then that's not good. That's not right.
So that just sounds like uh, showboating. But ego for me is like, it's kind of important because it helps solidify the person that you are, and you're proud of that.
Yeah, I guess I mean it's how you define it, right? Like for example, I define pride in two different ways. So there's the pride, like let's say you're a father and your son just graduated university and you're proud of your son. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That means you care about your son's success. Versus that pride that drives someone to do terrible things because they want to be the best and they want everyone else to be under their feet or whatever. So it's how you define. I don't think they're the same thing. I think we're using one word to describe two completely different things. And that's part of the problem. Vocabulary, right? Limits us. For example, in Greek, you're Greek, you know that love has four words, right? Is let's see, philia, eros, storge, and agape love, right? So, you know, when you break it down, it's good, right? Because they're different. They're different things, but we use it only one word to define. And so people shouldn't be defined, like we have to be very careful when we're defining people, how we define them and by what terms we use that are not misconstrued, right? So a person should not be defined, for example, by a single action. I've always said that. Sometimes people do something good or bad, it's an isolated event, and they're defined by it. If it's a really bad thing, you know, like people will be like, oh my goodness, this person did this or that. But you don't really know that person on an everyday scale, right? Like what drove them to that event. I'm not condoning it if it was a terrible action they took, but should they be defined by that single incident? Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Unless you spend, you know, what's the expression? A mile in someone's shoes. I mean, technically, you should be doing a lot more than that. But going back to your ego question, um, there is uh, that part of you that is driven, that inner fire, let's call it, okay? That you're like, this is what I want to achieve in life, and I'm not going to let anything get in my way. I don't know if I'd call that ego. That's just inner drive. That's fire. That's determination and perseverance. That's good, and you want that. But I guess I define ego a little differently, more like you said, the showboater, right? The guy who's like, ha ha, you know, look what I did, right?
I got
Like
the
a guy who
five
hits a home
Porsches
run and
and the
watches it,
yeah, I got the
right?
five Porsches and the three Lamborghinis and
Yeah,
the
that's
six
terrible.
houses.
And you're rubbing it in everyone else's face. You're like, look what I got it. It's like you're saying how I got it, but you don't. I mean, that's not right. And people generally don't like people like that. They're like, get this clown out of my way, right? Like, but if you're doing it and you have that inner fire because you want to succeed so you can be a better contributor to society, you can influence more people and impact more lives. If that's your motive, then that's a beautiful thing.
What if you use that as a tool to light to light the fire under someone's rear?
Then that's good,
Because
right?
there
If
are
you're
some people online that do it.
so sorry, maybe sorry to light the fire. Say
Light the
again what you said.
fire under someone's rear to get their life together. Because there
Oh,
are
right,
some
in a
people
positive way.
in
In
a
a positive
positive way, because there are people online that are trying to do that, like Dan Pena, Grant Cardone, and people are looking at these guys and they're like, these guys have inflated egos. It's like, well, no, they're just trying to show you what is possible.
Okay, like Tony Robbins is an example. I think he's a great guy. I sense that he's doing it for the right reasons. Like when I hear him talk and stuff like that. There's other guys that you feel like they're just trying to get attention or followers or whatever, right? Like those channels where they're giving money to a poor guy and videotaping it or food or whatever, right? Like, I don't know what's really their motive, right? But if you're doing it for the right reasons, and oftentimes we can't judge. Like it's hard to know what's in everybody's heart, right? Some people are really good actors, good or bad. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, absolutely. If your motive is to get someone back on their feet, even if it comes across as cocky, that's a perception. But again, we can't be held accountable for perceptions, right? There's reality and there's perception in life. Everyone has their version of what they think that is going on, which is a perception. But the truth is often something different. And I know I'm getting all philosophical on you, but I'm a very philosophical person actually. But I
Great. Keep it
believe our
going. Keep it
yeah.
going. I love it.
Well, our pursuit in life should be the pursuit of truth, not the pursuit of perception. Like, unfortunately, a lot of people just go with the status quo, right? If this is a commonly held belief, they just jump on the bandwagon. I think that's ridiculous. And I can't, and that happens. Again, I don't want to go political or religious, but that happens a lot in different areas where this is the commonly held idea, right? And you're just like, okay, that sounds cool. I don't want to ruffle too many feathers, so I'll just kind of go along with that mindset. And that's actually the worst thing you could do. It's good to stand up against something that's being broadcast, like let's say Nazi Germany back in the day, and here you have these crazy ideas being promoted, and that was a time to stand up against it. Was it going to make you popular if you were living in Germany? No, right? They had the Valkyrie or whatever. They went up against the popular movement. They got themselves killed, but that was honorable. And I believe in honor. I believe as a man that we should be training young men to think more that way and not to just be compliant and want to conform to society's standards. We're seeing a lot of guys, unfortunately, that are going in the wrong direction. They're becoming very passive. And we don't want passivity. A man should never be passive. That's like the worst thing. We should be like Spartans, all right? What happened to the Spartan mindset? I'm not saying cruel because they had bad qualities as well. I'm not totally, defending their mindset, but there was something about how ancient men were raised that was much more noble than how a lot of them are being raised today. And I'm just coming out and I'm just saying it. I really believe that. I don't believe they're being raised to be strong men in today's society.
Do you think that's because like we're gonna like kind of shift? Do you think that that's because their inner drive is being snuffled out? Because there's a lot of guys out there that have great ideas to do so much good to this world, to bring so much positivity and make this world a better place. But to me, it feels like that inner drive that they have, that fire, that some of these leaders that are in this world, they're just trying to snuffle that out so that they can go with their own
Yeah. And
commentary.
I don't think it's just the leaders. I think it's a lot of the ideals that have become popular. And I want to be careful what I say on the program, not to get too political, but um, there's there's a lot of single families. There's a lot of guys being raised by their mothers and not their fathers. And I don't think it's wrong to say this. I think it's an obvious statement. If a man doesn't have a strong male figure in his life, or I should say a boy, right? When he's a boy, he doesn't have a strong male role model, which would be his father in an ideal situation. It's very hard for a mother to impart those ideals, to teach that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, when you look at the father figure, it's very important, and it doesn't get stressed enough. A lot of kids a lot of young boys are growing up without that male presence in their life, and a mother, as well intentioned as she may be, cannot provide that male role model sort of framework for that child that he would otherwise receive if his parents were together. And so because we're seeing more of this, higher divorce rates and more single families and that sort of thing, I think that's part of the contributor where a lot of young men at that critical stage in their life where they would be developing that strong sense of masculinity, it's not developing. And I think you can compare that to, I've heard analogies, for example, of birds trying to get out of an egg. And they did experiments where they would help a young bird by helping to break the egg to get out of the egg. And then other birds, they just let them struggle. And ironically, the birds that were helped to get out of the egg did not survive. They didn't develop those survival skills breaking out of the egg. That was part of developing those survival skills. That those ones that were helped too much didn't develop. And they didn't survive. The ones that had to fight to get out of the egg totally by themselves, they survived. And that again ties into the survival mindset that when we started the show we were talking about. I think people need to have a survival mindset. I think if you're spoon-fed and you're in the Cabbage Patch your whole life, you know, you got a golden spoon in your mouth, you got a remote control to change the channels. Like people are too, like they've been too coddled. And when you're too coddled, you don't develop that tenacity. You don't develop that ability to say you're lost in the wilderness and you got to stay alive for 10 days until you're rescued. You have to have that mindset. And a lot of people are just lacking it. They're soft. They're very soft. You know what I mean? If they don't learn to overcome that, how can they possibly have that sense of self-worth and self-confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. How do you help men or women find that inner drive for themselves? And how do you help them bring it out to the light for other people to see?
Well, I mean, I try to work on them. I'm obviously limited in my capacity, but you know, as a coach, because I'm actually a strength and conditioning coach, and I like to use that title because there's an element to that. It's also like a professional athlete working with their coach, developing the mental qualities that are necessary for success. I am very encouraging, right? There's different styles of trainers out there. Some guys are like drill sergeants. They're like, do this, do that, over and over. I'm a very encouraging trainer. You know, I pinpoint what the person is doing well. I focus on that. I reinforce it. Because if you're constantly knocking someone down, especially when they're already not that confident to begin with, nothing is going to come out of it, right? You're just reinforcing that they're a failure, right? But if you tell them, hey, listen, look what you did. Look at your numbers. Look at what your numbers were a month ago. Look what they are now. Look at the progress you made. A lot of times you don't even realize. And I'm like, look how much weight you added to this exercise in just 6 weeks. And I really, you know, sometimes I even do graphs for them. I actually do the pie graphs and all that stuff to show them what their progress is. Because when they can visually actually experience it, then you kind of drive the point home. And when they're seeing progress, it's reinforcement, right? They're like, wow, I did that. And now you're building confidence, right? Confidence comes from success. You can't just make it up. You can't fake confidence. It comes from success, which is why you want to have realistic goals, but that are challenging enough. They're not super easy, that allow you to overcome. But as you overcome them, your success grows. Your confidence grows, right? So you're constantly going after something that's challenging but achievable. You achieve it, you raise the bar, your confidence grows accordingly. And then your self-worth, a lot of time, is also tied into what you're able to do in life. Because if you feel more confident as an individual, you're likely going to also have a greater sense of self-worth.
Do you think that setting the bar a little bit even further higher might help the individual push themselves a little bit further, or do you think it might have the opposite effect? Like I know there's Grant Cardone that says that, you know, he goes by his 10x rule, where it's like take your goal and add an extra 0 at the end of it.
It depends again on the individual. Some guys are able to be pushed to the absolute limit. I mean, I've worked with guys where it almost seemed like they had no limit. Like they were freaks. I had to tell them to slow down because I thought they were going to kill themselves. And they had an agenda. They were just on a tear, right? And then of course you get the undermotivated. I've had certain clients, and this is kind of funny. I used to have an option on my website where somebody could buy a gift certificate for someone else. And a few times I had guys' wives buy the gift certificate for their husbands, let's say on their birthday or something. And these guys had no idea that they've been enlisted, right? So here you get a guy who doesn't even want to be there. And you're like, oh man, how am I going to deal with this? Zero motivation practically, right? Like just picking up a 10-pound dumbbell, the guy would be like, oh, do I really have to, right? And yeah, so you get all sorts of characters. So as far as extending the bar, it depends on the person you're dealing with. Some of them you could take them to the moon, and others you have to kind of hold their hand. You know, like when you're teaching a kid to ride a bicycle, and you put the little training wheels on. But generally speaking, over time, yeah, the idea is progressive resistance, right, and progressive challenges, and you want to raise that bar higher and higher and higher. And throughout life, the bar should always be higher than it was the day before.
We are coming up close to the end of the show right now, and these are the 7 or 8 questions that I ask all my guests. And
Okay.
I'd just like to get your feedback on these 7 or 8 topics. With the increase in people suffering from depression from the uncertainty that we live in, what would be the one thing that you could tell them to keep their hopes up?
Well, I'm a spiritual guy. Again, I don't want to go way off topic here, but I mean that obviously makes a difference for me. I don't think that conditions are going to be worsening forever. But again, that's, everyone has their different beliefs and whatnot. But that being said, you want to look at the bright side, even from a practical standpoint, and just say, look at history, right? So, for example, there have been pandemics in history, that the Black Plague in Europe and the Spanish flu, right, in 1919. And they all had their lifespan. They all lasted however long they lasted, and then they went away. And they had a lot less medical resources back then than they do now. So I'm sure that COVID will be the same. I mean, there's going to be at that point, whether it's this year or 2023, whatever it is, hopefully in the near future, where it just kind of like phases out. So I think people, they have a tendency to panic when these things are going downhill for a long period of time. They get responded. I'm also seeing an increase in a lot of fraud and people doing things that they normally wouldn't because they can't pay their rent and they're trying to, do some dirty stuff to get a little extra money, which is sad. But again, I think it's just a reflection of the period we're in. The stock market's taking a hit. The NASDAQ was down really low yesterday. I lost a little money there. But again, it's going to rebound, right? Usually when something really bad happens, I mean, look at Germany now, and look at where Germany was after World War II. And now they're the richest country in the European Union. And their money was like wallpaper in 1945, right? After all the sanctions and everything that were imposed on it. So it could have been easy for them to think our country's ruined, right? We're done. And then they went and they recovered very well. So it's going to be the same. And I just tell people, just have confidence, give it time, keep your head up, and let's ride it out.
What's the one thing that you do daily that amplifies your ability to stay focused?
Set goals and actually achieve them. Actually do them, right? If I wake up today and I have 5 things I want to get done, I make sure it gets done.
Nice. If you could pick up the phone right now and call yourself at 20 years old, what would you tell yourself?
A lot of stuff that we talked about in this conversation, right? I'd be giving a big speech. But basically, a lot of the mistakes that I made since then until now have been huge setbacks. And I would just try to coach the 20-year-old version of myself not to repeat them.
So looking back, would you change anything?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's people that I dated that I wouldn't date, right? There's, I mean, there's a lot. Are you kidding me, man? Like, if I had to go back, but then again, the person I am today would probably not be the same as I am if I hadn't gone through that adversity. And suffering does build character, right? And it's a common expression. So sometimes it's tempting to think, oh, I'd redo everything. But at the same time, I'm proud. I'm saying this in the positive context of the word proud of the person that I've become. I'm happy with the person that I've become. I can look myself in the mirror and say, you know what, I respect myself. I feel like I've achieved a lot of things, and I feel that I stand for things, that are important, dignity and integrity and that sort of thing. So tough one. That's a tough question because maybe I would be a softer person and in a bad way if I hadn't gone through that adversity. So, that's it. Luckily, we don't have that option. I'd probably mess it up.
What scares you?
What's that?
What scares you?
Oh, what scares me? I mean, we all fear the unknown, right? I mean, that's a common denominator. I guess death being one of them to an extent. I mean, nobody wants to, even though I talked about overcoming that fear, but like I said, everything's a work in progress. As I get older, I start thinking about limitations that may come along, and that scares me, right? Because we take pride as men in what we're physically able to do, and I sometimes worry that might not be, what I can do today, I might not be able to do in 10 or 15 or 20 years. So there's a little bit of anxiety there. I try not to focus on it too much because it's outside of my control to a certain degree, right? But that, I would say, that's pretty much it. Like, everyday things don't really freak me out that much. I just kind of go with the flow, and I try to do what I can. And when I fail, I just get up and try again, and amend my approach to try to be better at it the next time.
Very good. Where do you see Health Fitness Toronto in the next 5 years?
I'm hoping, I mean, like I said, since 2008, I started the company. So it's already been 14 years. But there's been growth. Despite the pandemic, there's been a little bit of stuff going on in the background. And I updated my website actually earlier, or I should say middle of last year, around July, August of 2021. So I've made a few changes, and I intend to hire more staff once things kind of pick up a little bit. But hopefully it grows, and ideally it'll be like LA Fitness or something, or like something big like that, or Good Life. That would be cool. I know it's really overextending, but that's like everybody's dream, right? For a fitness thing.
That thing, shoot for the moon, but aim for the stars.
Exactly. Don't aim too low. You'll always get 80 to 85% of what you aim for, right? So if you aim for the stars, you might get the moon. If you aim for the moon, for sure you won't get
What about you personally? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
I love traveling. I really miss traveling. I haven't done much of it since this whole fiasco kind of went off. But hopefully I can pick that up again. And I want to. There's a lot of continents I have not been to. I have been to Europe a lot. I love Europe. I have actually not been to South America. I have a buddy I met in one of my trips who lives in Brazil. So I want to go to Brazil. I need to go to New Zealand. Even the pandemic, they've handled it very well. I'm impressed with that. And they have a very attractive female prime minister. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but I think it's a very beautiful country, and I would love to go there. I mean, it's supposedly a country that has every type of ecosystem that exists is on New Zealand, and they don't have any poisonous animals, which is weird. Like Australia has, all these poisonous snakes and all these critters, and apparently New Zealand does not. So, I'd love to visit New Zealand.
I miss traveling too. I really do. Really miss it.
It'll be back.
It'll be back. It'll be back sooner than later. Where can people find more about you?
Where can they find more about you? About me? Call me. My number's on my website. I mean, I'm happy to talk to anybody. I have my profile on LinkedIn, and I have my Instagram as well. And I guess you'll be sharing that with everybody. But yeah, like, as far as from a fitness perspective, I encourage everybody. I give a free assessment, so that's part of my mandate. Free physical assessment, or sorry, I should say the verbal part, the oral part of the assessment that's done over the internet. So it can be pretty intense, right? There's a lot of things that I can give you some good advice on, and it'll give you an idea, kind of break the ice of whether or not we'd be a good match for one another. And yeah, any questions anybody has, don't be shy. Give me a shout. I'm happy to answer them, and hopefully we end up in a client relationship with it.
And yes, I will be posting all your links within show notes, and everybody can have access to your website and your Instagram account, and to you directly personally.
Appreciate that.
Any final thoughts?
Oh wow, we covered a lot today. I think this was awesome. Actually, you had a lot of good leading questions, and we kind of covered pretty much a lot of life philosophies. But to the guys out there watching the show, I'm guessing that the theme is, of course, increasing their confidence and building up their self-esteem and that sort of thing. Don't get discouraged. I'm saying that to the audience. Like, There's going to be down days. I know with mental illness, it can be very challenging because it's not necessarily logical. It doesn't necessarily follow a logical sequence. If you're feeling terrible, you might have no reason to feel terrible. It's just maybe it's a chemical thing or whatever that's going on. But just good diet, rest, exercise. There's many things that can definitely help. Vitamin supplements. Oftentimes it's a deficiency that can be triggering it. I find magnesium has been very good for me, and I encourage people to research the benefits of magnesium. It's cheap, or I should say inexpensive, but there's so many. It's a catalyst to so many chemical reactions in the body and in the brain. Many times, depression and anxiety and all those things are actually the result of insufficiency in magnesium levels. A lot of people don't know that. But I encourage people, like, research, do your research. Don't get down. Events will happen that are very disturbing or very, they can really like wear you down and whatnot. But just recognize that tomorrow's a fresh start. You get a chance, something happens, let's say your car breaks down or a girl runs away or whatever it is, right? Things happen in life, but just keep rolling with the punches and eventually more opportunities will come along and you'll probably end up in a better situation.
Amazing. Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an amazing episode. I really loved it. I know there's a lot of guys out there that's going to be listening. That's going to be getting a lot of useful information to help better themselves. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for what you do. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate your gratitude. Thank you.
Going through hard times is just a test. What you need to know is that when you get out of whatever you're going through, you will be stronger than ever before, and you don't need to go through it alone. Always know that you are not alone. Stay tuned for more real people with amazing stories that are just like yours. Until then, to everyone listening, I wish you a good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you may be in this crazy world. Guys, it's John from the Fitness Oracle and Resilient Reboot Productions. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I really, really hope that you enjoyed it. Take it from the top, from here. 1, 3, 2, 1, go. Thank you so much. No. Starting in 3, 2, 1, now. Hey guys, it's John from Resilient Reboot Productions and the Fitness Oracle. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and if you know anybody that's suffering from mental health issues that you know that this episode could help, please share it with them, as it is tailored to help people out there with mental health issues. If you are listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Breaker, or whatever streaming service that you use, please give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, as it will help us reach out to more people that are suffering from mental health issues. But before you go, I'd like to invite you to a special program that we've created here at Resilient Reboot Productions called Band of Brothers. Over the years, we've discovered a system to help men regain their confidence back, just like overweight and depressed men that have lost their place in this world from all over this world. We've put together a group of men that are here to support your journey, showing you how easy it really is by implementing simple everyday actions that take little to no time out of your day. If you guys are interested, just click the link in the show notes below to get a one-on-one call with me so we can identify your issue and how we can best serve you best with these calls. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.